7 old American coins, 7 different stories, and some surprising claimed values. From a 1943 Mercury dime to Buffalo nickels from 1916, 1917, 1920, and 1937, these coins survived wars, changing generations, and more than a century of history. But before you spend or clean an old coin, watch this. One tiny detail could change everything. 1943 Mercury dime, the silver dime, from a world at war. The world is in the middle of the Second World War. American soldiers are fighting across Europe and the Pacific. Factories are producing war supplies around the clock. And back home, ordinary Americans are living through a time unlike anything they had ever experienced. In the middle of all this, the Philadelphia Mint is quietly producing a small silver coin that will eventually become a piece of American history, the 1943 Mercury dime. Look closely at this coin, and you'll notice something immediately important. There is no mint mark beneath the date. That tells us this dime was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, where coins were produced without a mint letter. But the detail that really catches the eye is the dark, almost black layer across the surface. After decades of exposure to air and different storage environments, silver coins can develop darker tones and surface coloration. That aged appearance can make a coin look completely different from the bright silver piece that originally left the mint. But remember, dark does not automatically mean rare. Collectors want to know whether the surface is original, whether the coin has been cleaned or treated, and what condition it is actually in. The 1943 Mercury dime carries one of the most beautiful designs in American coinage. On the front is Liberty, wearing a winged cap, a design so often mistaken for the Roman god Mercury that the nickname Mercury dime became popular even though that was never its official name. Around Liberty are the words Liberty and In God We Trust, while the date 1943 appears near the lower edge. Turn the coin over and you see the facets surrounded by an olive branch, symbolizing strength and peace. The letter E appears on one side and pluribus on the other, completing the famous motto, E pluribus unum. And underneath all of that history is something else that makes this dime important. It is made from 90% silver. In 1943, this was not a collector's treasure. It was money. It could have been carried by a factory worker, used at a local store, placed inside a cash register, or carried by someone whose family member was serving overseas. Every time it changed hands, it became part of another ordinary American story. And then the decades passed. The war ended. America entered a new era. Generations changed, but the little silver dime remained. Eventually, its bright original surface became darker, its edges became worn, and the details softened through circulation. That wear is not simply a flaw. It is evidence that the coin actually lived the life it was created for. This example is described as circulated, meaning it has spent time moving through everyday commerce. For collectors, the condition of a circulated coin can vary significantly, so professional grading and authentication are important when a high valuation is being considered. Now here's where the mystery becomes even more interesting. For the particular example we're discussing, the claimed current market value is around $26,000. Serious collectors examine the entire piece before making that kind of judgment. They study the date, the rim, Liberty's features, the lettering, the reverse details, and the surface. They also look for unusual die characteristics or genuine mint errors that could make one example different from millions of others. And there is another important rule. Never rush to clean a coin simply because it looks dark. Removing the original surface can permanently alter the coin, and may hurt its collector appeal. Sometimes the dark appearance is part of the coin's long journey through time, and preserving that surface allows experts to study it properly. Think about what this tiny dime has witnessed. It was created while one of the largest conflicts in human history was still unfolding. It survived the end of the war, the rebuilding years, the rise of modern America, and generations of changing technology. It may have been sitting quietly in a drawer while the world around it transformed. That is the beauty of coin collecting. A coin doesn't have to be large to carry a huge story. This 1943 Mercury dime is only 10 cents by face value, but it connects us directly to an America that existed more than 80 years ago. So if you ever find a 1943 Mercury dime without a mint mark and notice a dark-aged layer across its surface, don't immediately dismiss it. Check the date, examine both sides, inspect the condition, and never clean it before you know exactly what you're holding. Because sometimes the smallest details can lead to the biggest questions. Where was this dime? Who carried it? What did it buy? How did it survive for more than 8 decades? And could the coin sitting quietly in an old collection be far more interesting than anyone ever realized? That's the mystery that makes the 1943 Mercury dime worth taking a second look at. Coin 2, 1920 Saras Mercury dime. The San Francisco silver dime. With a century of history, the First World War has ended, America is entering a new decade, and the country is beginning to experience the dramatic changes that will define the Roaring Twenties. Automobiles are becoming more common, cities are growing, and everyday American life is changing quickly. Far away from the battlefields, the San Francisco Mint is producing a small, silver coin that will quietly survive all of it, the 1920s Mercury dime. Look closely at this coin, and you'll find the small letter S beneath the date. That single letter tells you where this dime was struck, San Francisco, California. For collectors, a mint mark is more than just a letter. It connects the coin to a specific place, a specific mint, and a specific chapter in American history. This particular example is described as almost fine, meaning it has clearly experienced circulation, but still retains a substantial amount of its original design detail. The highest points show wear, but Liberty's portrait remains recognizable, and the major features of the design can still be studied. And that wear tells a story. This wasn't a coin that spent its entire life locked away in a collection. It was made to circulate, and it did exactly that. Imagine this dime moving through America during the 1920s. It could have been carried inside the pocket of a factory worker, handed over at a local shop, placed inside a cash register, or saved by someone who simply liked the design. The coin may have crossed countless hands before eventually being forgotten. The Mercury dime design itself is one of the most recognizable in American coinage. Liberty appears wearing a winged cap, a design that many Americans mistakenly associated with the Roman god Mercury. That nickname became so popular that collectors still call it the Mercury dime. Today, even though the official design represents liberty. Around her are liberty and in God we trust, with the date 1920 below. Turn the coin over, and you'll see the facets surrounded by an olive branch, a powerful combination representing strength and peace. The reverse also carries the words United States of America and one dime, completing a design that was both artistic and symbolic. And underneath that beautiful design is something that makes every genuine Mercury dime from this era especially interesting. It is made from 90% silver. In 1920, however, that silver content was not the reason people carried the coin. It was simply money. 10 cents could be useful in everyday life, and this little dime could have been part of countless ordinary transactions. But time has a way of transforming ordinary objects. The people who first used this coin are long gone. The stores have changed. The roads have changed. The technology has changed. Yet the dime survived. That's where collectors begin to see something different. They aren't just looking at 10 cents anymore. They're looking at a surviving object from an America that existed more than a century ago. Now here's where we need to be careful with value. For the particular example we're discussing, the claimed current market value is around $132,000. Serious collectors examine the entire coin. They look closely at the date, the S mint mark, Liberty's features, the lettering, the reverse design, the rims, and the overall preservation. They also compare the coin with known examples and check for varieties or errors. This is especially important with older silver coins because condition can make an enormous difference in collector interest. And there's one more rule worth remembering. Never clean an old coin simply because it looks dirty or worn. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surface and may reduce its collector appeal. A coin's natural surfaces are part of its history, and professional collectors generally want to know exactly what happened to the coin over its lifetime. Think about what this 1920s dime has survived. It existed before the Great Depression. It was already more than a decade old when the stock market crash changed America. It survived another world war, economic upheavals, changing generations, and an entire century of technological progress. Somewhere along the way, it may have disappeared into a drawer or been forgotten inside an old collection. Then, one day, someone found it again and noticed the tiny S beneath the date. That one letter opened the door to a much bigger story. This is what makes coin collecting so fascinating. The coin is small, but the history attached to it is enormous. So if you ever discover a 1920 Mercury dime with an S mint mark, don't immediately judge it by its worn appearance. Examine the condition carefully, study both sides, check the mint mark, and look for unusual details. And if someone claims that a coin is worth an extraordinary amount of money, make sure the value can be supported by professional grading and reliable market evidence. Because sometimes the most important discovery isn't simply finding an old coin. It's discovering exactly what makes that particular coin different. A 1920s Mercury dime may have started its life as 10 cents in a rapidly changing America, but after more than 100 years, it has become a tiny survivor of history, a silver reminder of a world that existed long before us, still carrying its story in every worn detail. Coin 3, 1918D Mercury dime. The brown silver survivor nobody noticed. There are old coins that look valuable the moment you see them, and then there are coins that hide their story beneath years of age, circulation, and changing color. This 1918D Mercury dime belongs to the second kind. More than a century ago, in a very different America, this small silver coin left the Denver Mint carrying a tiny letter D beneath the date. At that moment, it was worth only 10 cents. And nobody could have imagined that generations later, a collector might hold it and wonder just how much history was sitting in the palm of their hand. Look at the front and reverse carefully. Both sides show a distinctly brown, aged layer across the surfaces. That appearance immediately gives the coin character, but it also raises an important question. What exactly happened to this silver surface over the last 100 years? Silver can darken and develop different shades through long-term exposure and storage, while other surface changes can come from environmental conditions or previous handling. That's why experienced collectors don't simply look at color and declare a coin rare. They investigate the surface itself. The 1918 D-date takes us back to a fascinating moment in American history. The First World War was still underway, and the country was preparing for a completely different post-war future. The Mercury dime design had only recently appeared on American coinage, making this coin part of the early years of one of the nation's most famous dime designs. On the obverse, Liberty wears the famous winged cap, surrounded by Liberty and In God We Trust. The date 1918 sits along the lower edge, while the small d identifies Denver as the place of manufacture. Turn the coin over, and the powerful facets and olive branch design appears, representing strength and peace. The words United States of America and one dime complete the reverse. And beneath all those details is 90% silver, giving the coin an intrinsic connection to the monetary system of its era. Imagine this dime in 1918. It might have been used while the country was still waiting for the war to end. Perhaps it passed through a shop in Denver, traveled to another state, or disappeared into someone's savings. Unlike a modern coin, it wasn't designed to be admired. It was designed to circulate. And circulate it did. The worn details and brown surface on this example are reminders that the coin spent part of its life outside a protected collection. It survived ordinary use before eventually becoming old enough to attract a collector's attention. Now comes the part that can make collectors curious. The claimed current market value for the particular example we're discussing is around $82,000. This is where careful examination becomes essential. A collector would want to study Liberty's portrait, the date, the D-mint mark, the rims, the reverse details, and the surfaces on both sides. They would also look for genuine varieties, errors, unusual strike characteristics, and signs of cleaning or alteration. The brown layer is especially important because its origin needs to be understood before any serious valuation can be made. And whatever you do, don't try to polish or scrub it yourself. An old silver coin may look better after cleaning to an untrained eye, but altering its original surface can reduce its collector appeal and make professional evaluation more difficult. Sometimes the imperfect appearance is actually part of the evidence that tells us how a coin survived. Think about the timeline hidden inside this dime. In 1918, the world was still at war. The following year brought peace, and the 1920s transformed American culture. Then came the Great Depression, another world war, decades of economic change, and eventually the digital age. Through all of those chapters, this tiny dime continued to exist. It survived when the people who first touched it did not. That's what makes a century-old coin so powerful. It doesn't need to speak. Its date, design, mint mark, and surfaces tell the story for it. So if you ever come across a 1918 Mercury dime with a D mint mark and a brown layer across both sides, don't judge it simply by its color or worn appearance. Examine it carefully, protect the original surface, and look for the details that separate an ordinary example from an extraordinary one. Because the real mystery isn't just whether an old dime is worth thousands of dollars. The real mystery is how a 10-cent piece from 1918 managed to survive more than a century and still find its way into the hands of someone curious enough to ask what it might be hiding. Coin 4. Imagine finding a coin that has been sitting quietly for more than a century, worn by time, but still carrying the face of an America that no longer exists. This is a 1920 Buffalo nickel, a 5-cent piece from an era when America was moving rapidly into a new decade. There is no mint mark on this example, which tells us it was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. But don't let that small detail fool you into thinking there is nothing unusual about this coin. The real story begins with the design itself. On the front, a powerful Native American portrait looks toward the edge of the coin, while the date 1920 sits below. Turn it over, and an American bison stands proudly across the reverse, one of the most recognizable images ever placed on a United States coin. This design was created by sculptor James Earl Fraser, and it was meant to capture an image of the American West at a time when that world was rapidly disappearing. In 1920, this wasn't an antique. It was everyday money. 5 cents could buy a small item, and this nickel could have passed through stores, streetcars, restaurants, and countless pockets. Imagine the people who touched it. A worker leaving a factory, a customer paying at a shop, a child holding 5 cents in their hand. Each person added another chapter to the coin's journey without knowing that the same nickel might still exist 100 years later. Now look at the condition. This example is described as fine, meaning it has clearly circulated, but enough of the original design remains for the important details to be recognized. The Native American portrait is worn, the bison has lost some of its sharper details, and the surfaces show the marks of a coin that actually lived in commerce. For collectors, that wear is part of the story. It proves that this wasn't simply made and forgotten in a vault. It traveled through real American life. But there is another reason collectors pay attention to buffalo nickels. The design is famous for having areas that wear quickly, especially the date and the high points of the portrait and buffalo. That means finding an older buffalo nickel with strong, readable details can be much more interesting than finding one that has completely lost its design. The absence of a mint mark tells us this coin came from Philadelphia, but the mint mark alone does not make it extraordinarily rare. The exact value of an individual coin depends on its grade, strike, surface quality, varieties, errors, and authentication. For the particular example we're discussing, the claimed current market value is around $124,000. A valuation at that level would require the exact coin to be professionally examined and supported by reliable market evidence. This is why experienced collectors don't stop after seeing the date. They inspect the entire coin. They study the Native American portrait, the date, the lettering, the buffalo's body and legs, the rims, and every unusual mark on the surface. They also look for genuine varieties or mint errors that could make one example dramatically different from another. And if you find an old buffalo nickel that looks dirty or dark, don't rush to clean it. Cleaning can permanently change the surface and may reduce its collector appeal. Preserve the coin exactly as you found it until you understand what you're holding. Now think about the history hidden inside this 5-cent piece. In 1920, the First World War had only recently ended. America was stepping into the Roaring Twenties, a decade of cultural change, new technology, automobiles, movies, radio, and rapidly changing lifestyles. This nickel was there at the beginning of that transformation. It survived the economic changes that followed, the Great Depression, another world war, and generations of American history. More than 100 years later, the people who first handled it are gone, but the coin remains. That's the magic of the buffalo nickel. Its value isn't only in the metal or the number printed on a price guide. Its real fascination comes from the history captured in its design and the journey recorded by its worn surfaces. So if you ever find a 1920 buffalo nickel without a mint mark, don't immediately throw it into a pile of ordinary change. Check the date carefully, examine the Native American portrait, study the buffalo on the reverse, and look closely at the condition. Don't clean it, and don't assume that the absence of a mint mark automatically makes it rare. Instead, ask the questions collectors ask. What is the exact grade? Is the surface original? Is there a variety? Is there an error? And can the coin's authenticity be verified? Because sometimes a 5-cent coin can carry a century of American history in a space smaller than your thumb. And this 1920 Buffalo nickel is one more reminder that the coins people once spent without a second thought can become the historical treasures collectors search for generations later. Coin 5, 1937. Buffalo nickel, the darkened nickel. From the edge of an era. Imagine a 5-cent coin that was created when America was still struggling to recover from the Great Depression, then survived into a completely different world. This is the 1937 Buffalo nickel, a coin from one of the final years of the famous Buffalo design. Look closely, and you'll notice there is no mint mark beneath the buffalo on the reverse. That means this particular coin was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. But the most noticeable feature is the light black layer covering parts of its surface, giving the nickel a deep, aged appearance. On a coin that has survived for nearly 90 years, color and surface changes can come from long-term storage, handling, and environmental exposure. But collectors know that a dark surface by itself does not prove rarity. They want to know whether the surface is original, altered, corroded, or simply naturally aged. Now go back to 1937. America was living through the later years of the Great Depression. Millions of people were working to rebuild their lives, businesses were recovering, and everyday purchases were carefully considered. This 5-cent coin was real spending money. It could have been handed to a storekeeper, carried by a worker, saved by a child, or dropped into a cash register without anyone imagining that decades later it would become a collector's curiosity. The Buffalo nickel itself tells a remarkable story. On the obverse is the powerful Native American portrait, with liberty and the date 1937 surrounding the design. Turn the coin over and the American bison dominates the reverse, standing above the denomination 5 cents and the words United States of America. Sculptor James Earl Fraser created the design to represent an idealized image of the American West, and by 1937, that design was approaching the end of its life. The Buffalo nickel would be replaced after 1938 by the Jefferson nickel, making a 1937 example part of the final chapter of this iconic coin series. That makes this coin especially interesting from a historical perspective. It was produced during a period when the United States was changing rapidly. Automobiles were transforming transportation, radios were bringing entertainment into homes, and American families were preparing for a future nobody could fully predict. Within only a few years, the nation would be pulled into another world war. Yet this little nickel continued doing exactly what it was made to do: circulate. The condition of this particular example adds another layer to the story. Its aged appearance and dark surface suggest that it has spent a long time exposed to its surroundings. But don't make the mistake of trying to remove that dark layer. Cleaning an old coin can permanently alter its original surface and may reduce its collector appeal. If you discover a Buffalo nickel with unusual dark coloration, the safest approach is to leave it untouched until its surface can be properly evaluated. And now we reach the number associated with the particular example we're discussing. Its claimed current market value is around $67,000, and supported by evidence such as exceptional condition, a documented variety, genuine mint error, or other unusual characteristics. This is why collectors never judge a Buffalo nickel by its date alone. They examine the portrait, the date, the word liberty, the buffalo's details, the lettering, the rims, and the entire surface. They look for varieties and genuine mint errors that can separate one coin from another. They also pay close attention to the condition because buffalo nickels are famous for losing their highest details through circulation. Think about the journey this coin may have taken. It was born during the Great Depression, passed through an America on the edge of enormous change, and survived the Second World War, the post-war boom, the arrival of television, the space age, the computer age, and eventually the digital world. The people who first handled this nickel are long gone, but the coin remains. That's what makes the 1937 Buffalo nickel so fascinating. It isn't just a 5-cent piece. It's one of the final representatives of a famous American design, carrying the marks of decades on its surface. So if you ever find a 1937 Buffalo nickel without a mint mark and notice a dark layer across the coin, don't clean it and don't immediately assume it's worthless. Study the date, inspect both sides, examine the surface, and look carefully for unusual details. Because sometimes the most interesting coins aren't the ones that look perfect. They're the ones that have survived long enough to carry the evidence of their journey. And this 1937 Buffalo nickel may have a story that began nearly 90 years ago. Coin 6, 1916, Buffalo nickel. The beautiful reverse from a lost America. Some coins become fascinating because they are rare, but others capture your attention because the moment you turn them over, something about the design simply feels different. This 1916 Buffalo nickel is one of those coins. Look at the reverse side, and you'll notice a light black layer across the surface, giving the coin a deep-aged appearance. There is also no mint mark, meaning this nickel was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. But before we talk about value, let's travel back to 1916, a year when America looked completely different from the world we know today. The country was watching events unfold across Europe as the First World War continued overseas. America had not yet entered the conflict, but the atmosphere was changing. Automobiles were becoming more common, cities were expanding, and the modern American age was beginning to take shape. Somewhere during this extraordinary period, this small 5-cent coin entered circulation. On the front is the famous Native American portrait created for the Buffalo nickel design. The date 1916 appears beneath the portrait, while Liberty is positioned along the right side. Turn the coin over, and the design becomes even more dramatic. A powerful American bison stands across the reverse, surrounded by United States of America and the denomination 5 cents. Above the buffalo is E pluribus unum. This wasn't just another ordinary nickel design. It was an artistic attempt to capture the spirit of the American West at a time when that way of life was already disappearing. And that's what makes the reverse of this particular coin so interesting. The light black layer gives the bison a completely different appearance. It makes the details look older and more mysterious, almost as if the coin has been carrying its history directly on its surface. But collectors know that unusual coloration must be examined carefully. Darkening can develop through age and storage, while other surface changes can come from environmental exposure or corrosion. Color alone doesn't establish rarity. The absence of a mint mark is another important clue. On a buffalo nickel, the mint mark normally appears beneath the denomination on the reverse. When there is no mint mark, the coin was produced in Philadelphia. That doesn't automatically make every Philadelphia nickel rare, but it gives us an important piece of information about where this particular coin began its journey. Now imagine using this nickel in 1916 5 cents was meaningful money. This coin could have been handed to a shopkeeper, carried by a factory worker, used on public transportation, or saved inside a child's pocket. It may have traveled through countless transactions before someone finally put it away. Every mark and every softened detail could represent another chapter in its journey. The buffalo nickel also has an interesting characteristic that collectors know very well. Its highest design points could wear quickly. The date, the Native Americans' features, and details on the buffalo can become softer through circulation. That's why condition matters enormously. A coin that still preserves strong details after more than a century can attract much more attention than one whose design has almost disappeared. This particular example is described as having a beautiful appearance, especially on the reverse, with a light black aged layer. And now comes the value associated with the example we're discussing, a claimed current market value of around $136,000. So don't judge this coin simply because it looks old. Look at the details. Examine the date. Check the portrait. Study the buffalo. Inspect the lettering and rims. And pay special attention to the surface. If you discover a buffalo nickel with unusual dark coloration, don't polish or scrub it. Altering an old coin's surface can permanently affect its collector appeal. Think about the timeline. This coin was created more than a century ago, before the First World War had ended, before most American families owned modern conveniences, and before the technology we take for granted today existed. It survived the war years, the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, another world war, and generations of change. And somehow, this tiny 5-cent piece is still here. That's the real beauty of the 1916 buffalo nickel. The value isn't only in the number someone might place on it. It's in the history captured by the design, the worn surfaces, and the mysterious dark layer that has developed across the reverse. A coin that once passed through ordinary American hands has survived long enough to become a window into a completely different America. So if you ever find a 1916 buffalo nickel without a mint mark, turn it over and look closely at that buffalo. Don't clean it. Don't dismiss it because of its age or dark appearance. Study every detail, because sometimes the most remarkable part of an old coin isn't what you immediately see. It's the century of history hiding underneath it. Coin 7, 1917 buffalo nickel, the old 5-cent coin that refused to disappear. What if a 5-cent coin could take you back to America before the modern world had fully arrived? This 1917 buffalo nickel does exactly that. More than 100 years ago, this small piece of American money entered circulation during a time when the country was standing on the edge of enormous change. There is no mint mark on this example, telling us it was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. Today, that tiny detail helps us identify where the coin began its journey, but the real story is written across its worn surfaces. Look closely at the coin's old appearance. The surface has the unmistakable character of age, while the fine condition means important parts of the original design remain visible despite more than a century of circulation. This isn't a coin that simply sat untouched in a collection. It appears to have lived a real life. Every softened detail and every mark can be a reminder that this nickel once moved through everyday American commerce. The buffalo nickel itself is one of the most recognizable designs ever placed on a United States 5-cent coin. On the front, the powerful Native American portrait dominates the surface, with Liberty appearing along the edge and the date 1917 below. Turn the coin over, and the American bison stands proudly across the reverse. United States of America surrounds the animal, while 5 cents appears beneath it. Above the buffalo is E pluribus unum. The entire design was created to evoke the spirit of the American West at a time when that world was rapidly disappearing. But 1917 was not an ordinary year. America was approaching a major turning point. The First World War was raging overseas, and the United States was about to enter the conflict. At home, families were following events that would change the nation forever. Somewhere during those uncertain months, this buffalo nickel was produced and released into circulation. Imagine its first journey. Perhaps it was handed to a shopkeeper, carried by a railroad worker, placed inside a pocket before a long trip, or saved by a child who thought the unusual buffalo design was fascinating. Nobody knew that the same 5-cent coin might still exist more than 100 years later. And that's where the fine condition becomes part of the story. Buffalo nickels are famous for losing their highest details through circulation. The Native Americans' features and the buffalo's highest points can become noticeably softer with time. So when you find an old example where the date and major design elements remain readable, those surviving details become important clues for collectors. That's why you should never judge an old buffalo nickel simply by its date or by the absence of a mint mark. Examine everything. Look closely at the date, Liberty, the Native American portrait, the buffalo, the lettering, the rims, and the overall surface. Check for genuine varieties or mint errors. And if the coin appears potentially valuable, professional evaluation is the safest way to establish what you actually have. And whatever you do, don't clean it. An old coin may look better after polishing, but changing the original surface can permanently affect its collector appeal. Preserve the coin exactly as you found it until you know its history. Think about what this little nickel has survived. It existed during the First World War. It witnessed the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, another World War, the rise of modern transportation, television, computers, and eventually the digital age. The people who first held it are long gone, but their 5-cent coin remains. Now comes the number associated with the particular example we're discussing. Its claimed current market value is around $85,000. A valuation at that level would require professional authentication, exact grading, and reliable evidence showing what makes the individual coin exceptional. That is the magic of the 1917 Buffalo nickel. It may have started as ordinary pocket change, but more than a century later, it has become a small window into an America that no longer exists. So if you ever discover a 1917 Buffalo nickel without a mint mark, stop before you spend it. Examine the date, study the condition, look carefully at both sides, and preserve the original surface. Because sometimes the most fascinating treasure isn't something that looks brand new. It's something old, worn, and forgotten, a tiny survivor carrying more than 100 years of American history in the palm of your hand.